The Black Ship Side Story, What's the Job? Chapter 13. Over the following days, Nico and Myra continued their training with Weskel and Wham during their downtime. Though it had been admittedly a bit awkward at first, Nico eventually allowed them to send a message to Wyatt. Eventually, though, they started getting back into a groove. Wham by far more easily than Weskel, but still progress was made. Even Ada finally caved and started spending time with the family when she found out Winona knew how to sew, among other mundane tasks often given to drones or androids, and Wirt was a mechanic. She and Winona would spend time mending the crew's clothes and chatting about their lives, while Ada and Wirt would tinker with little things that needed fixing around the ship, all the while picking each other's brains as they talked shop. Only Kartok mostly stayed away out of a sense of wishing to avoid making things unpleasant, at least outside of checking up on Wham's injury to make sure it continued to heal well. He still preferred to keep to himself, talk with Amara, or mingle with his normal crew when they weren't otherwise busy. Today was no different than any other day on a starship waiting for the time it took to travel the vast distances between the stars. The sounds of shots echoed off the walls of the training room as Weskel and Nico fired upon endless throngs of targets. "Push up on the right." "I'll cover you," ordered Nico. "Go. Now." Weskel hesitated, however, waiting for the wall guard to turn fully toward Nico. Only then did he make a beeline for a patch of cover near the entrance to the facility they were trying to force their way into. Before he could get there, another soldier mounted the wall nearby, saw his approach, and immediately opened fire on him. "Captain," Weskel called out. "I'm pinned! Help me!" Before an answer could be given, a metallic object clinking and clanking across the ground ended when a small, round, and handheld item landed a couple of feet from him. His eyes widened for half a second before the grenade exploded in his face, ending the simulation. Weskel growled in annoyance, ripping off his helmet and plunking down on the cold floor as frustration got the better of him. Nico smirked but kept his amusement to himself as he unhooked from the training rig and walked over. Sitting down next to Weskel, he sighed. "So, what happened?" "I died," Weskel said blandly. "Why did you die?" Nico asked, rolling his eyes mildly at the snippy response. "I thought it was obvious." "I took a grenade to the face," Weskel continued, his clenched fists showing his growing frustration. Yes! "You're right there," Nico chuckled. "It was pretty obvious when pieces of you went flying everywhere. But my question was why, not how. And do look past the obvious." "Enlighten me, my lord," Weskel shot back sarcastically while grinding his teeth, thus drawing a raised eyebrow from the captain. "You didn't listen. You didn't trust that your partner may have known something you didn't," Nico started. "You only trusted you—" "Why?" Weskel asked, cutting him off. "Why what?" Nico asked curiously. "Why do you care?" About this! About all of this," Weskel growled, eyes fixated upon his kidnapper. "Why do you care if I can attack a fortified position? Or know when I'm being hunted by Drazen, or learn how to handle myself in hand-to-hand combat? We're just a job for you, right? Nothing more than a means to an end." He got up from his place on the ground and started to pace. "Just something to trade for money, right?" "I thought you'd appreciate being out of your cell," the captain replied with barely any hint of emotion. Weskel's shoulders dropped lower than his mouth did, disappointment plain in his stance, and a look of hurt in his eyes. "That's it?" Nico let out a long breath through his nose as he took his helmet off and got back to his feet. "What were you expecting, Weskel? That we'd train a bit and I'd have a change of heart and let you all go?" He took a few steps forward toward him. "That a few days in space would make me forget that very powerful people hired me to get the job done?" he asked, as his expression hardened while he closed the gap. Weskel's expression began to mirror Nico's with every question hurled his way. "Sorry to say it, but you are right. You are a job!" Even as the words left the captain's mouth, he forced them through gritted teeth, not wanting to say it. "However, I saw in you someone who wanted to protect his family but couldn't. I saw in you someone who felt helpless but didn't want to be. And I saw in you someone who didn't want to be in this position ever again. He tilted his head, looking at him curiously. Was I wrong? Weskel took in a deep breath, puffing his chest out a bit, but finally answered, No! Nico nodded, allowing a hint of a smile to tug at the corner of his mouth. I understand. Weskel, I have trained to fight both men and Xenos for many years. I have fought against people far more advanced than anything the Principality can hope to field. And in that time, I have still lost far more than you can imagine. Helpless to save some. But I have learned much, and I wanted to help give you some of that knowledge so that you didn't have to be in that position, feeling that way ever again. Weskel turned away, his expression softening as he heard and thought on the words for a moment. Returning his gaze to meet Nico's, he now looked more curious than angry. Why? Nico opened his mouth, about to say something, but stopped. Deciding against what was in his mind, he closed his mouth and smirked while putting his helmet back on. Do you want to learn? Or do you want to ask questions that won't help you? A defeated sigh escaped Weskel's lips as he looked around and picked up his helmet once he got sight of it. Clicking it into place, he snapped off a crisp salute. Ready, Captain? Nico smiled behind his helmet and gave a quick nod before heading back to the training rig. Now then, let's try this sim again. Only this time, I want you to follow my orders when I give them. Meanwhile, in the flight simulation pods, Myra and Wham were conducting a simulated patrol run through a somewhat dense asteroid field. Myra, Wham asked, can I ask a question? Is it related to the simulation? Well, not exactly. No, Myra replied curtly. Pay attention. Wham frowned and looked around for any signs of hostiles. After not seeing any, he tried again. It's just my brother and I were talking. Myra rolled her eyes. That's nice. Now shut up and pay attention before you get blown out of the sky. Oh, come on. These sims are easy, Wham said, sounding almost bored while simultaneously not noticing the trio of fighters coming in at his 3 o'clock. Myra didn't answer. She just started falling out of formation to deal with the enemy fighters on their way through the dense field. Though he didn't seem to notice that either as he kept talking. Seriously, though. We don't get it. Why? His words were cut off when the alarm went off, warning of a missile lock. Wait, what? He shrieked as he tried to get his bearings on where and how. He immediately threw his craft into a spiral, wrapping around asteroids as he tried to use them for cover. And if he was lucky, a place to hide before coming back out to attack. Unfortunately for him, the trio of craft had already anticipated that, with one craft moving to cut him off while the other two stayed on his 6. Myra! They're all over me. Shots flew past him as he desperately tried to evade. But more and more, hits were landing when finally a missile hit him dead on, disabling the craft. His fighter was now in a slow, free spin, and he managed to rotate just enough to see the enemies that were behind him fire another missile straight into his cockpit, ending the simulation. And that is what happens when you don't pay attention, Myra said sternly. No. That is what happens when my wingman abandons me, Wham shot back. No, Wham. That's what happens when you expect your wingman to save you from your own mistakes, she corrected. As the screen went back to a loading screen, he continued. Anyway, now that we're waiting... Oh, for the love of all that's holy. Are you really not going to let this go? Myra growled, pushing up her helmet to rub her temples in irritation. Wham just shook his head and smiled a big, toothy grin in her HUD. She smirked even if she was still annoyed. Fine. But only if you promise to pay attention once I answer. Deal? Deal! Wham fired back without hesitation. She raised an unconvinced eyebrow at him through the HUD, but acquiesced. Ask your question. Hooray! Wham cheered teasingly. We can't figure out why you guys are being so nice. Like you kidnapped us, I got shot, and then you patched me up and let us play games and walk around the ship. I have no clue. Now let's move on, Myra spoke quickly. What? That's not an answer, Wham protested. Don't do that to me! Myra sighed, looking heavenward as if for strength. Fine. I truly don't know why the captain is allowing all this. But... Yes? Wham pressed when she hesitated. I have my suspicions. Wham was fidgeting in his seat, waiting with bated breath for the answer. "Which is?" he finally asked when he couldn't wait any longer. With a roll of her eyes, she answered, "I think it has to do with what happened to him as a child. His family had gotten involved in some things they shouldn't have." "Oh! Were they pirates? Drug runners?" he asked as he started peppering her with questions in the middle of her story. Myra cleared her throat. "Do you want to hear this or not?" Wham slumped in his seat slightly. "Sorry. Continue." "Anyway, he doesn't really talk about it. Even to me. I've only ever gotten little bits and pieces if he slipped up while talking about something else or had too much to drink," she explained with a shrug. But anyway, whatever they were involved in, it finally caught up with them. His whole family was killed. Parents, siblings, cousins, everyone to the last. Myra let the moment hang there so he could contemplate what exactly she was trying to say. Wham felt his throat clench as he swallowed nervously. "So he's—" Myra nodded. "Yes, he's the last of his line." "That's awful." Wham thought about it for a bit, but added, "Did they deserve it?" She shrugged. "I don't know. I still don't know what it was they did." "But what does it have to do with us at all?" Wham asked, confused. "He had 2 siblings who were killed during the purge. 2 brothers. I think you and Weskel remind him of them," Myra finally admitted. "At least that's my guess." Much to her surprise, the comm was silent after she stopped speaking. Her eyes drifted up to see Wham's face in her HUD. It was silent as he worked through what she said. He was serious and no longer possessed the boundless enthusiasm and energy he had held moments before. "And if you tell him I told you this, it won't be a simulated missile you take to the face next time," she threatened with a playful smirk, trying to draw him back out. Wham smiled and nodded, but remained silent for a few more seconds as thoughts of what he'd do or how he'd feel if his parents and brothers had suddenly been killed. "Thanks for telling me," he said softly. "We can start the next simulation if you want." She smiled and switched the simulation over to a racing course. "Let's just have some fun. I'll race you through the field. If you can stay within 5 seconds behind me this time, I'll let you pick the next sim." Wham smiled a little wider at the offer. "Let's do it!" As Myra and Wham raced, Ada found herself sitting and chatting with Winona as they mended some of the crew's clothes, while Wirt read a book from a tablet he had been allowed to borrow. "Please forgive me, but you are saying you and your family are essentially slaves?" Winona chuckled and shook her head. "No, we're not slaves. In fact, slavery is outlawed in the Principality." "But," Ada hesitated as she tried to make heads or tails of how things worked. "You're not allowed to get the most of the implants your Principality is so famous for. You get very little for the work you do, so you never really have much chance to improve your situation. And even if you somehow manage it, you will always have people above you who can order you around because that's just their right, while you are required to follow because that's your lot in life." She scratched her head, totally lost. "I'm really not trying to offend, but the only real difference I see is that a slave doesn't get paid, but you technically do, even if it is just a pittance of what you deserve." Wirt lowered his tablet as he looked toward the ladies. "It's complicated. And we're not doomed to stay commoners forever. If you work hard enough in the right areas, you can become a noble, too, by earning a knighthood. Like our son Wyatt. Then again, most try to buy a knighthood title." Winona nodded. "Yes. He rose as high as he could as a commoner in the Royal Navy. But then, through his deeds, he was awarded the noble rank of Knight Banneret. And truly, being a commoner isn't all that bad. Sure, the food isn't lavish. The clothes and houses are the grandest. But we don't usually have to worry about assassinations or kidnappings," Wirt said with a small, ironic grin as he went back to reading. "Usually." Ada narrowed her eyes at Wirt, but let slip a small smirk onto her face. "Pros and cons of every lifestyle, huh?" All 3 shared a small laugh at the sheer irony of it all. "How about you?" Winona asked curiously. "Are you very far from home?" "We have never heard of your kind before." Ada nodded. "My people are called Ma'kulauzia. It means we are silent steps. Our territory is several weeks, if not months, of nearly uninterrupted travel from the closest Principality-held systems. How did you meet the captain? Winona pressed. He actually seems like a Principality native. He is. But he was forced to leave a long time ago, Ada shrugged. Anyway, he found me well, it doesn't really matter where, she said after a moment's hesitation. We have a system called thralldom. And no, it's not as bad as it sounds, but it does need some explanation. If someone falls on hard times, they can sell themselves, and only themselves, not others, to a master to work for free till that debt is repaid. The master provides food, shelter, and basic medical coverage. Ada nodded her head in thought. You might call it a type of indentured servitude. The master can't do anything they want to the worker, however. And once the debt is paid, the thrall is free to go. And never do they actually lose the rights of normal, non-thralled people. The hard thing about this system sometimes is finding someone willing to take on a thrall. The initial expense is great, and the commitment from both parties is often long and grueling, but the potential revenue makes it worth it for the master. I was desperate, my options were limited, but I remember instantly regretting signing the contract on the line. Still, one night I was on stage when the captain came in. She grinned at the memory as she stared absent-mindedly at the item of clothing she was mending. I noticed him when he got close, but he was very much looking for someone else. That is, until one of the customers tried getting handsy. A soft chuckle escaped her as she continued the story. I protested, and before security could even come to my aid, the captain pulled him back and told him to lay off. As you can probably imagine, that didn't go over so well with someone who had been drinking for a while. The drunk threw a punch, which the captain easily dodged. Throwing one back himself, the drunk flew into the hands of security who, after looking a bit shocked at having the jerk tossed into their arms, simply nodded and hauled him away. The captain gave a small bow to me, something exceedingly rare in those kinds of places, and kept walking, Ada finished with a shrug. And that's how I technically met him. Wirt, who had by this point put the tablet down to listen, frowned. Wait a minute. How does mechanic or tech specialist, if you like, Ada broke in with a grin. That was my real job even then. I just had some debts that needed to be paid more quickly than my profession would allow. And even then I was a dancer, nothing more. Right, Wirt acknowledged while turning a bit red. But how did you go from that to working with the captain? Oh, Ada laughed. I stumbled on him executing someone in that place. Turns out he found his target. The problem was the alarm had been sounded. A little sloppy on his part, if you ask me. But back then he was still learning. In the end, I helped hide him and then got him out. Wirt and Winona's mouths both dropped at the casualness with which the feline woman just explained how her caption essentially murdered someone. But, Winona stuttered, you weren't scared? Like it all? Ada shrugged. It was a port town, she said casually. A really rough area. Stuff like that happened all the time. When someone's murdered like that, you can bet the corpse is going to get looted before any local authorities show up. The best thing you can do in those cases is be useful. Besides, he did me a solid favor. The least I could do was return it. She finished with a winning smile, clearly reveling in the adrenaline-filled excitement of that part of their lives. So a few days later, after he got paid, he came back and found me after my shift? She grinned. We talked. He offered to pay off my debt as a thank you. Something I instantly took him up on, believe me. Eventually, he found out I was a mechanic and offered me a spot on his crew. And I never looked back. Best decision I ever made. Wirt and Winona looked at each other, a little unnerved after listening to the tale that the captain who had been treating them so well really was capable of murder. And that even Ada, the bubbly, easygoing, and charming mechanic, just thought of it as another day at the office. So if you all work outside the Principality, how did you ever hear about us? Wirt asked as casually as he could. Ada just shrugged. You'd have to ask the captain about that. He keeps quite a few things secret, even from us. But he's never done us wrong, and he's always treated us like gold. So I say let him keep his secrets, and I don't worry about it. And do you ever think of leaving this life? Winona asked with a tilted head. Ada sighed wistfully. I've thought about it. But I'm having too much fun right now. Maybe in a few years I'll settle down. Who knows? Maybe I can even convince the crew to go all in on a retreat we can all enjoy. Wirt shifted uncomfortably as his thoughts drifted toward his family and their tenuous, uncertain future. Any idea of what we can expect for us? He asked abruptly. Ada looked thoughtful, a more serious expression returning to her face. Considering how much he's done for you and your family, I doubt he means any harm to fall on you. Outside of food, water, and toiletries, he tends to be neglectful of prisoners during transport. Then again, they also tend to be the scum of the galaxy, which you clearly are not. So there's that. Well, at least we don't rank that poorly, he added a bit sarcastically before going back to his tablet. Wirt! Winona whispered sternly, unsure if she was embarrassed by his mild rudeness or fear of annoying their captors. It's fine, Ada defended. You have a right to be upset. Though, for what it's worth, she said, standing up from her work, I'm sorry we met this way. You have a lovely family, Mr. Staples, but I'll leave you be now. She gave a small but respectful bow alongside a pleasant smile and left. Winona watched her leave before turning to her husband. What? Don't look at me that way. They're still not our friends, he defended after catching her look. Winona sighed and eventually nodded. It's just, please don't give them a reason to change how they are treating our boys and us while we're here. These might be the last relatively easy moments we have together. Wirt nodded. Fair enough. I'm sorry, dear. Winona smiled lovingly and reached out to squeeze his hand. Later that evening, after the Staples had been returned to their cells and the crew was gathering for their meal, Ada turned toward her captain. Nico, you never told me that these commoners actually believe they are supposed to die in combat just to make sure a noble lives. Nico raised an eyebrow at her. You never asked. But, I mean, really? She asked, ignoring the unhelpful response. Like any noble at all? Or just important ones? To commoners, all nobles are important nobles, he said while rolling his eyes. At least that is what most nobles believe the commoners believe. They are, in fact, taught that when growing up. It's drilled into them. Good grief. No wonder you never went back, Ada said, shaking her head. It's not so bad when you're a noble yourself, Nico chuckled. Oh, Ada continued. Before I forget, Winona and I have finished mending all the clothes. She's actually rather good at stitch work. She was showing me where I was making mistakes today. It was nice to finally figure out what I had been doing wrong and why things were still coming undone. Great, Kartok added dryly. Does this mean my tools will finally stop falling out of my pockets? He teased. Maybe if you weren't so rough on your clothes, it wouldn't be an issue. Besides, if you didn't like it, you could have taken care of it yourself, Ada reasserted. True enough, he grinned. Thank you. After they all thanked her, Myra spoke up next. And how is your tutelage of Weskel going, Captain? Is he doing as well as Wham? Nico narrowed his eyes at the implication. First of all, it's not really a fair comparison to compare ground fighting skills against void fighter skills. A smile began to form across his face. Having said that, he's picking up the concepts rather well. He was already a skilled hunter, so it was really just refining a few bad habits he had, like getting him to realize he was no longer the only hunter in an area. And Wham? Myra smirked. He's a natural. Like his brother, apparently. His biggest problem is that he gets bored too quickly. Because of this, he likes to move on from lessons, thinking he's got it down, even when he needs more time for finesse. But he definitely has a lot of promise. Ada grinned mischievously. Is the little man still checking out your backside every turn? Myra sighed tiredly. Check that. He has 2 problems. Oh, surely not. He's adorable, Ada teased further. Meanwhile, Kartok was watching the back and forth with growing confusion and a mild amount of irritation. My goodness. The way you all talk, it sounds like we should invite them to be a part of the crew. The comment, and more so the tone, caught the others off guard, and they turned to him curiously. Is there a problem? Nico asked curiously between bites. Kartok shook his head, but didn't look as though he believed it. Not really, Captain. I was just wondering why everyone seems to be getting so warm and cozy with the prisoners. The silence that instantly sprung up afterwards was palpable, as all the joy was sucked out of the room. Nico swallowed his food and put down his fork as he gave his full attention to Kartok after clasping his hands together. Because I didn't see the need to treat these people with the same disdain we do to the normal caliber of people we tend to go after, he answered with a small frown. Do you have a problem with my orders? The captain let his words hang there as he tilted his head to look at his medic curiously. Kartok stiffened at the question as he began to look nervous. No, Captain. I just wanted to make sure we wouldn't lose objectivity. So you're calling into question my fitness to command? Nico asked, raising an eyebrow. No, Captain, Kartok replied more firmly. Then it sounds like we're all on the same page. They'll be handed off soon, and you'll be fat with your winnings. And then we'll move on to other things. Does that sound good? Nico questioned genuinely. Kartok remained silent and hesitantly went back to eating his food. The captain narrowed his eyes at the Corellian going back to eating before they were finished, but decided to let it go this time. Good. They're just people, not monsters. Treating them decently doesn't mean we're forging lifelong bonds. Now then, let's have a better evening, eh? Nico finished rhetorically, going back to his food, though he was still surprised the minor disagreement happened at all.